Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you have refreshed and refueled lightly and ready to learn more on COVID-19 challenges and lessons learned from this AISCR summit. I hope you also have learned something from the keynote speakers as well as the presenters thus far. I wish to thank Prof. Mayer for being such an amazing program director. Well done, Prof. You have done an excellent job. If we're not online, I would have requested a very big round of applause for your outstanding work. But I have also noticed how much you have mastered technology. Whoever said that our older generations are technologically challenged. There you have it, Prof. Mayer. Prof. Mayer is participating in a number of social media platforms such as Zoom, WhatsApp, and Teams, just to mention a few. Well done, Prof. You've blessed us with such an being an amazing director. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to this second session of this summit. My name is Winnie Dlamini, as you've heard this morning. However, as you can see, I have literally and physically changed my hat. Now I am going to be your program director. Still, I am going to be with you until the end of this session. I am currently pursuing my PhD with UNISA and also employed as a lecturer in the College of Economic and Management Sciences under the Department of Applied Management. I specialize in supply chain, and my research interest is on procurement practices in universities. Hence, they put me on this platform because this is where I have more fun. And as Mr. John Carney mentioned this morning that in any crisis, there's an opportunity to grow. And also, I have been listening and I have learned a lot from these presentations. And what I liked that has been said thus far is that most of the speakers acknowledged that, yes, there were supply chain challenges that were experienced. There were mistakes too, and even mentioned that corruption was part of the experience. But what I like the most is that they acknowledge that it is when we have shortcomings and we understand that I have made a mistake there, that we can learn and grow. So, which is the reason why we have this summit. So even Professor Boateng also, I liked what he said. He even thanked the unfortunate COVID-19 for putting COVID-19 in the place so that we can see what is going wrong, what are we doing right, and what are we doing wrong. So from this moment onwards, we are going to learn more from our speaker, Prof. Pasheka. Prof. Pasheka, we love Prof. Pasheka so much in AISCR, and Prof. Pasheka just shared with us in one of our webinars just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now we're having him again. Let me introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, Prof. Pasheka. Prof. Pasheka is a professor of governance in the Department of Governance, and the first Deputy Chancellor for Academic Affairs in Kabale University. Kabale University is a government university located in southwestern part of Uganda. Professor Pasheka is Also an extraordinary professor of governance in the School of Business Government in the Northwest University, where Prof. Meyer, my co-presenter, is planted to. Prof. Pasheka is an accomplished scholar, researcher, teacher, manager, and also administrator and leadership in specialist and also a consultant. I have read also a number of publications from Prof. Pasheka. I love him very much and pleased to have him around with us today. Prof. Pasheka is going to share with us now his presentation, which is titled COVID-19 Supply Chain Practices, Challenges and Lesson Learned. He is going to give us their Ugandan perspective. Prof. Pasheka, welcome. Your time starts now and you have only 20 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Program Director Winnie, the Vice Chancellor, the Executive Dean of the school, Professor Ambe, the President of the Association. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to this session where I will be sharing briefly the experiences from Uganda. And within our context, you need to appreciate that humanity has always been prepared for war and hunger, but not a pandemic of this magnitude. And when COVID-19 came, it was a shock to society, the health systems, the economies, and every government worldwide. No one had ever seen the crisis it has created. And in our country, as a result, a number of measures which have been unprecedented were instituted, with the president making a total of 33 declarations, and the ultimate declaration was the total lockdown for the country, which started on 30th of March 2020. And there are a number of stay-home directives which were given, and it is only essential workers who were expected to remain in the city center and the streets. Now, at the time when the lockdown was instituted, it was reported as of January that Uganda's exports had declined from US dollars 383, and this was to 352. And then
sorry, Prof. Pasheka, sorry to disturb you. Can I just ask you to put your presentation on slide mode?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Is that okay now?
Thank you. I'm happy.
Okay. Now, in the case of Uganda, I can give a typical example of a supply chain where if you have two factories, which are illustrated in blue, those two factories, you'll find they buy inputs from around 340 suppliers, which are in orange. And those suppliers sell to around 135 farms, which is in green. And then those 135 farms also in turn sell to about 1,548 farms, which are in purple. And they import from 96 foreign suppliers, which are in black. And that tells you that when COVID came, imagine any disruption on this supply chain for the two factories only, what would happen? When COVID came, of course, there was a lot of stress everywhere. On that slide, that is a picture of our president, the president of the country, who was demonstrating to the citizens on how to do press-ups exercises. He did that demonstration twice because the people were in homes, and because of stress, they started going out of the roads to jog and do exercises, and he was encouraging them to do exercises in-house, and he was demonstrating to the country on how they can do press-ups. Now, COVID, when it came, it affected every aspect of our life: the food we eat, the drugs patients take, the clothing we put on, the supply of all necessities of life were affected. The education sector was closed up to now. Almost all the universities and the educational institutions are still closed. It is only last Saturday when the final medical students were allowed to resume class, and there are plans to open the institutions maybe around 15th of October. That is for other final classes, but the other students are still within their homes. Now, Uganda is majorly an agricultural country, and one of the top 10 exports, which account for 82% of the overall value of our global shipments as of 2019. Coffee, tea, and spices were contributing US dollars 441, which is our total exports equivalent to 33.6%. And most of these, as you can see, they are in the agricultural sector. And when COVID came, it had huge impacts. In that picture, when the COVID came, of course, people were locked down and they had no food, especially within the city center. And the country's current population is around 46 million. And the population density is around 229 per kilometer. And that means that 25% of the population are urban, and these were mainly affected by lack of food. So government, and we have, of course, a number of refugees, estimated at 1.1 million refugees as of November 2018, and these come from our neighboring countries, which the biggest from Southern Sudan, and then the Democratic Republic of Congo. So when COVID came, government had to respond by giving food distribution, especially in the city center. So in that picture, the Prime Minister of the country was launching the food distribution within the city, and because there were directives, for example, non-essential workers were not supposed to go anywhere in the city center. In that picture, some security forces had to take the rule of law in their own hands. So that was a young boy who was found in the city center, and they were chasing him. And in another corresponding picture, another young man was being clobbered by the security forces. Now, because of COVID, if we take an example of an agricultural supply chain in our context, that is a small food store in in the city of Kampala, and because most of the people were locked in their houses, the food supply was also a problem. So the only means of transport of acquiring food for the majority was getting this motorcycle, where you have to give an order. The motorcycle person has to go in the market, buys the food stuff you want, and then he will deliver them to your home. Of course, there were risks along this process because everyone was hungry. Some of them who were not reliable had to run away with the supplies which they were required to deliver. Now, the lockdown affected most supplies, but unfortunately, it increased the demand for the foodstuffs because everyone had to eat. and due to public transport restrictions and the curfew hours whereby 7 p.m. everyone was supposed to be indoors, it meant that a number of people could not move. And when they are not moving, the majority of the people transport their produce through public means. And it led to most businesses to close, like hotels. And when hotels were closed, were not functioning, it also meant in turn there was a reduced demand for some products, and most of the perishable goods like matoke, like eggs, they were not consumed, and the prices had to reduce, and the perishables had to, of course, get damaged. And the transport costs also increased as a result, yet the people were not earning during this particular period. The other measure which government instituted, of course, other than rolling out a public health campaign, was the distribution of masks. Out of the 46 million Ugandans, all people above, I think, the age of 6 years were supposed to get a mask. But I think as of today, only about 20,000 Ugandans have received face masks. And yet it was a policy of government to distribute to all those people. So while and this lockdown happened when we are in the middle of elections preparation, we have general elections in February of next year. So politically, there was initially a multi-partisan backing of the measures which were instituted by the president, but along the way, because of the political pressure, then some differences certainly had to emerge, especially on the mode of distribution of food. It was the position of government that only government agencies which were designated, the Ministry of Health and the task force, were supposed to be responsible for food distribution, and any politician who was found distributing food was supposed to be charged for some criminal offenses. And it also soon emerged that the colors to use on the face masks also became a political debate, because each political party wanted to associate its political colors with the face masks. And as I talk now, I think the face masks have been converted. Each political party has its own colors, its own logos, and they are distributing their supporters. Now, the food distribution, like I mentioned, was mainly among the poor members of society, especially in the townships. And it's around 1.5 million was estimated to be given the food, but the supply soon had to be affected by quality concerns, especially for posho and beans. The stories were ripe where most of these foodstuffs were intoxicated with some other substances like soil for purposes of maybe increasing the quality, and that certainly has an effect on human consumption. And because there were also lack of clear guidelines on the quality and the process of contribution, the citizens were required to contribute to the national task force, and in the process, some who contributed the food could not reach the intended users, and or it reached only the supporters of particular political candidates. And as a result, there were so many arrests, restrictions, and threats to whoever was going against the directives. And as a result, almost the food distribution system in the city was taken over by the security forces. Historically, across the human civilization journey, the military has always come up during points of disaster, and it is as if for them during, for example, this COVID, they were not affected by COVID, so the military had to take over the distribution of food, and it of course also had its own challenges. Now, from these are a few examples that I picked out during this presentation to share with you our experience in Uganda as a country on how supply chain was affected by COVID. And there are some major areas of impact on our supply chains as a result of COVID-19. For example, one of the areas that was severely affected was the availability of imported inputs in Uganda, and that led to the closure of a large number of factories and farms, which in turn resulted into unemployment. And remember, the majority of the population in the country are youth. Now, the availability of imported inputs was caused by the closure of all the borders and the closure of the airspace, with only certain cargo planes that would be allowed in, but of course, some non-essential items could not be allowed within the country. And that has massive disruptions on the supply chain, like I explained in one, using two examples of farms, how many, where they get their inputs, how they sell their products, and the interlinkages. Secondly, the factory closures in China, where this pandemic started from, resulted in so many disruptions in Uganda's supply chain, because China is one of the major trading partners of the country. From all types of required items in the country, they come from China. So once the COVID-19 caused the closures of factories in China, then you can imagine the disruptions that happened. The tourism sector, which is one of the major sources of revenue for the country, was seriously affected. And all the connected supply chains related to the tourism industry had to be affected due to these significant shocks. Job losses was the order of the day, and the 90% of them are youth. Up to now, the majority, especially in the private sector, have not yet recovered because of this pandemic. COVID also caused a dramatic shortage in the supply of face masks, especially in the rural places, and the food distribution, especially in the urban setup, like I explained. And there was a general evidence that the smooth operation of transportation infrastructure and the logistics, especially the air cargo, had numerous implications for the efficiency of the various supply chains in our country because of the interconnectedness of our distribution systems. Now, the health supply chains, certainly for non-COVID supplies, were significantly affected because attention for the entire country shifted to COVID-19 as if there were no other diseases, and yet this is even, we crossed the country when there was no reported case. At the moment, as of today, I think there are around 9,400 cases with 93 deaths only reported. But the closure of all these systems and focus on only COVID-19 meant that other health supplies were significantly affected. And COVID-19 also had an impact on testing the capacity of government to respond to pandemic. It was found also wanting, and specialized inputs, which all generally came into short supply, and they were hard to manufacture quickly. Even the face masks, it became difficult at the beginning to start the production of face masks, either because the inputs were not there, or people were fighting for the tenders, or maybe there were political disagreements on who should actually do the production of face masks and so on. And the disruptions in the transport and logistics made the delivery of other of essential supplies to the customers somehow complicated, and certainly our international supply chain was affected. Overall, you seem to see a trend where the use of security forces appeared to be the only solution due to the corruption which is associated with the civilian supply chain management processes, and the government tended to rely on the supply chain. From this COVID-19 as a country, and from me as an individual citizen, and as a supply chain professional, there are key lessons we learn from this pandemic. One of them is that supply chain management is heavily connected to policy decision making, meaning that you can make a policy, these directives which they were given, and a directive which was well not thought through can effectively and massively affect the entire supply chain processes of the country. Then the second lesson is that supply chain requires strengthened systems of monitoring and evaluation. From the time when this case was reported in China, that was in November 2019, at least the world could have noticed the dangers of that disease, but because they were weak systems for monitoring and evaluation, that's why it was allowed to be globalized. And the lesson we learned from there is the need to strengthen our systems for collecting, for monitoring and evaluation, which can give us useful data for decision making. Then you also tend to learn that modern supply chain management demands collaborative practices. For example, the Ministry of Health in every country, the coordination between the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Transport, the security forces, at least is a useful lesson that we have learned within the context of COVID-19. Risk management practices in our supply chain processes need strengthening. We also learn the importance of trust in supply chain management, because when the borders were closed for most of the people who could not travel, at least or even within the country where people could not easily move, you would rely on someone to deliver, for example, the food stuff in your home, and that is only that was based on trust. Then we also learn the role of security forces, like I mentioned, in state affairs and supply chain management processes during a pandemic. And as professionals, I think we need more attention on that. Agriculture played a critical role, and it is only in effective supply chain management of agricultural processes that all citizens in the country were able to survive. Everyone required food, and that food had to be delivered from where it is produced to where it is consumed. And we also saw or learned from this pandemic the role of ICT and innovation in supply chain management processes, because all communication was done online. The social media was the only almost source of information on the causes of the pandemic, on how to prevent it. So from this, we learned the useful role of ICT, and as supply chain professionals, I think we should focus our attention on ICT and how it can be integrated in improving our supply chain processes. And then the mechanism for addressing challenges of multi-sector engagement is a useful lesson, as well as the lesson on unilateral actions, which can sometimes raise uncertainty and cause unnecessary costs. Finally, my concluding remarks, COVID-19 has disrupted the functioning of all economies. It is not only in Africa, but supply chain practices have been vindicated that they are very useful. Those who never appreciated the importance, the value of supply chain management, I think even policymakers at the moment know what supply chain management is all about and how it can save lives. And as professionals in that field, that is a plus to us. And we also can mention that supply chain management has gained credibility, as almost all countries have now realized the importance of having very functional supply chain management, especially in situations of pandemic like the one of COVID-19. COVID-19 has also informed policymakers of certain critical supply chain areas that need attention, and the low demand for goods, the delay in delivery of factory inputs from all parts of the world, especially China, which is one of the major trading partners for the African countries, and the unpaid invoices together, which are continuing to squeeze manufacturers during the pandemic, is a useful lesson for policy making, and attempts at developing some capacity, at least because of COVID. some countries like Uganda and I'm sure in South Africa or other countries had to start imagining engaging in production, building their production capacity to match the demands which were created by the crisis. And I'm sure even beyond COVID, policymakers need to really have a conversation about building the local capacity in producing some of these supplies. Finally, meeting the demand for face masks, which is one of the mandatory requirements, has also become one of the main issues for governments as they fight COVID. While it is mandatory that everyone has to put on a face mask, but we have not, I think governments have not been able to give to the majority of the citizens, especially in the poor in the rural areas who are not able to afford some of these because of disruptions which have been caused by COVID. I think that's briefly what I can share with you, the audience. I thank Professor Ambe and the team for this opportunity to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pasheka. You have been an excellent presenter. And thank you for sharing with us the perspective of Uganda. Seemingly what we experienced around here was also happening around the globe. So we thank you for sharing your experience. We will be asking you to join us again for the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Mr. Dave Selby. He is the head of supply chain management in the Department of Health in Gauteng. Mr. Selby is currently pursuing his PhD in business management through the University of South Africa. And Mr. Selby is also accredited as a certified purchasing manager as approved by the Certification Committee of Boards of the Institute of Purchasing and Supply, South Africa. He has also achieved many awards and was pronounced as an overall winner in the category of Supply Chain Management Professionals of the Year at the third All About Public Procurement Awards. Well done, Dave, on that. And Mr. Selby will be our last speaker for the day, and he will take us through the topic on supply chain practices. His title will be from the health perspective. Welcome, Mr. Selby. Your time starts now, and you have only 20 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Deputy Speaker, National Assembly, Principal and Vice Chancellor of UNISA, the Executive Dean of UNISA, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Uganda, distinguished guests, honorable members, Prof. Ambe, all protocols observed. My presentation, as was alluded to, covers it from a health perspective. The Gauteng province, as at the 11th of October, the total number of confirmed cases, 223,011, new cases, 266, recoveries, 198,876, and deaths, 4,450. What I can allude to from this particular stats is that the recovery rate is extremely high within the Gauteng province.
Dave, sorry to disturb you. Can I just ask you to put your slides on the slide mode?
Is it now on slide mode?
Not yet.
On my side, it's showing. On the slide mode.
It's not yet. Try again.
It still shows a slide mode.
Not yet. And I can see that you've moved to the second one and we're still on the first one. Are you winning?
As I say, on my side, it's showing on slide mode.
Okay, you're not sharing with the slides with us at the moment.
Are you not seeing the slides?
Not at the moment. Okay, now I can see your slides. There it is. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Now you can
All right.
proceed.
Yeah, speaking about Prof. Meyer, it's age, unfortunately. So I've covered the stats for the Gauteng province. Background to the health department prior to the COVID-19 pandemic is that all the health institutions were procuring, personal protection equipment items for infection control. Due to the COVID-19, it's a new pandemic. However, the PPE protection items is something that is used on a daily basis within health institutions. An example that I can relate to is, for instance, our TB hospital, TB patients that are at our specialized hospitals. When clinicians go in to visit these patients, they still need to be protected, and a number of the protected items that we are currently utilizing for the COVID-19 pandemic is what clinicians utilize on a daily basis when they go into infectious patients. So the procurement of these items is not new for the health environment. However, what is new is the pandemic is new, and secondly, obviously, the quantity of items has dramatically increased. After the pandemic was announced as a disaster, National Treasury issued an instruction note 5 of 2020-21, which outlined the emergency procurement process that had to be followed in the procurement of the PPE related items. As a result of that instruction, within Gauteng, all procurement of PPE items was centralized. The Gauteng Command Center was established, and all procurement of PPE items was then centralized within the command center. Due to the disaster, this resulted in panic buying, and a lot of the instructions with regard to the emergency procurement, as been alluded to by a number of the previous speakers, there was deviations from those instructions, and majority of the PPE items that were procured through an RFQ, which is the request for quotation process, and there was total disregard for those suppliers that were on established contracts, which resulted in the situation that we are having with a number of investigations going on due to the irregular expenditure that's incurred as a result of deviating from the instructions of National Treasury. A third new initiative that the pandemic created was that within Gauteng, due to the limited size of the stores and the warehouses at the institutions and the volumes of PPE items that needed to be procured, we had to set up two centralized warehouses. Within Gauteng, we've got basically the north of Gauteng and the south of Gauteng, and in each area we set up a warehouse, and suppliers would then deliver to that centralized warehouse, and the health institutions would then collect their requirements from one of the respective warehouses. Due to a number of, and the speakers have alluded to, the corruptions and the disregard for procurement processes, National Treasury then repealed the instruction note that they previously issued, and they issued a new instruction note number 11 of 2020, highlighting that there is no longer the emergency process to be followed. However, government departments had to follow normal procurement processes. As a result of that decision, the procurement, the centralized procurement at the command center was disbanded, and it was decentralized back to the various health institutions. The current procurement process that is currently in place after the decentralization and the issuing of the new instruction note is on the left-hand side, is that all items that are on a transversal contract, it is the responsibility of all the health institutions to procure those items from that particular transversal contract. In the Gauteng province, we do have e-procurement. We utilize the SAP system, so all contracts are currently loaded onto the SAP system, and as a request is requested, the request is captured onto the SAP system, and there's an automatic call-off purchase order that is generated from the system. So as it's stated there is limited risk. The supplier has been approved via a transversal contracts. Prices are firm at the time of awarding that particular contract, and the quality was checked prior to awarding that contract. So there is limited risk involved in actually doing call-offs from established transversal contracts, and majority of these contracts are established on a national basis, and all provinces within South Africa are utilizing those contracts for procuring PPE items. I've already alluded to the fact that we operate on a SAP system, and that PPE items are procured via a call-off process. The quality, as I said previously, is verified at the specification stage, and accredited bodies are utilized to ensure that the quality of those particular items has been verified prior to establishing a transversal contract. What then happens is that the health institutions currently, due to the vast number of quantities that they are procuring and the limited capacity of storage within each institution, health institutions rely on delivery schedules. So a purchase order with a particular quantity is issued to a supplier. However, the supplier delivers on an as and when basis based on the delivery schedule, because it's very difficult at this stage to determine the number of patients that would be admitted on a particular day. So based on the volumes, the institution has control with the supplier on establishing what the need is for that particular day. If I move on to the right-hand side, this is items that's not on transversal contracts. Currently, at the moment, we've got 97% of all of our PPE items are on transversal contract, so there is limited risk involved. However, there is a 3% that are not on transversal contracts, and there's a high risk involved in that, because as previous speakers alluded to, is collusion with various suppliers, suppliers not having the quantity or the skills to be able to deliver as and when required. Prices, previous speakers have already alluded to the high prices that suppliers are charging, as well as quality issues, because it's an emergency-based procurement, and therefore there's not always the necessary time to establish the quality of that particular item. So items that are not on contract, we utilize the request for quotation process, and that is a short term, and I'll allude to the reason why I highlighted that as a short term. The specifications that are utilized going out on the quotation process, those are all utilized according to the specifications as drawn up by the National Department of Health, and samples are evaluated at the time prior to being awarded, and we are currently, because of time factors, we are not using accredited bodies. We are utilizing the clinical practitioners to assist with that. However, it does have its own challenges, which I'll allude to during my slide on the challenges. And these items are housed in a centralized warehouse, and we utilize these items as buffer stock so that the institutions can draw as and when they're required from the centralized warehouse. At the bottom of the slide, and my allusion to the fact that it's short term, is the department together with National Treasury are currently in the process of finalizing a transversal contract for the remaining 3 items that are not currently on a transversal contract, and that will then reduce, the risk from high to a limited risk, due to the fact is these supplies would all have been accredited prior to the awarding of the particular contract. Challenges is many of the previous speakers have alluded to the fact that there's non-conformance to SEM prescripts. National Treasury did issue guidelines, instruction notes on the process to be followed. However, a number of institutions, departments have not followed, the instructions as outlined in those, which have resulted currently in a number of investigations due to irregular expenditure and procurement of these PPE items. Health practitioners were not involved in the procurement of the PPE items. When the Gauteng Command Center was set up, the procurement officials were from other departments and not necessarily from the Department of Health, which even exacerbated the situation because of the factors they didn't have knowledge of what items, are being procured, what items are currently on a transversal contract, and hence everything was procured outside of the transversal contract, which resulted in exorbitant prices, the poor quality, suppliers not being able to deliver. I've alluded to the fact that 97% of the PPE items are on transversal contract. However, the 3% is not on transversal contract, and that is a challenge. But the feedback received is that by the end of December, the transversal contract would have been established, so therefore our risk will go to low risk. Lack of supply capacity due to the factors that it's a global pandemic. One of the issues that we're experiencing is that all the countries are all competing for the same items, and therefore suppliers did not have the capacity to deliver, was one of the challenges. Storage constraints within the various health institutions was another challenge for us, because they are only the storage capacity is for what stock they usually order and what is utilized. However, with the pandemic, as I alluded to, is that there were a number of additional quantities that had to be stored. Collection model from the centralized warehouse. The Department of Health is not set up as a transport company. We do have vehicles. We have your small vehicle that is used to transport patients, for various treatments to various centers. And the issue that we had and the challenge that health departments were experiencing was the fact that when they went to collect, quantities from the centralized warehouse, these quantities were collected in small vehicles, which resulted in boxes having to be broken open and the items packed within a vehicle in order to transport them. And this in itself causes a major risk within the supply chain. The lack of quality inspection at the time of award and at the time of receipt, because of the panic buying and the emergency, items were not sent to accredited bodies for quality checking, which resulted in inferior products being delivered to a number of institutions. Lack of standardized PPE item list. There was a list that was compiled. However, the interpretation of those particular items between various institutions was misinterpreted. And for instance, a number of speakers have spoken about a mask. Within a hospital, you get various type of masks. You can't just say that in a hospital a mask is a mask. For people like ourselves that go utilize masks to leave our houses, we can use a normal 3-ply mask that stops, you know, the transmission of the disease from one person to another. Whereas if you're a clinician and you're working directly on a permanent basis with infected patients, COVID-19 infected patients, you need a special type of mask. So therefore, the standardized list was compiled. However, you need to determine who is going to be utilizing what type of mask, for instance, and this goes for many other items of the PPEs. Lack of an analytical term, the panic buying. At that stage, there was no determination of the quantity that need to be procured. It was merely a guessing game. Get in stocks as quickly as possible. We were competing within the supply chain as well to get stock. So the more stock we could order, the better for the department. So there was no analytical tool that was utilized to determine the quantities. Lessons learned out of to date is that one of the recommendations is that all your PPE items should be on a transversal contract. This will ensure that should we experience a pandemic again, we won't have to go out and try and find suppliers. We would have suppliers that are on established contracts with approved pricing, and the quality would have already been checked up ahead. Strict compliance to SEM prescripts. As I said, many of the speakers have also spoken about, non-compliance. Therefore, we need to have strict compliance to SEM precepts to ensure that the processes are followed, and also to ensure that we don't have a situation where there are investigations, because the investigation for itself establishes many other challenges. For instance, at the moment, a number of our suppliers are being investigated. As a result of those investigations, a moratorium has been placed on the payment of those suppliers, and secondly, a moratorium has also been placed on the receipting of items from those suppliers. So in many instances, we have placed purchase orders. However, those suppliers are not allowed to deliver those particular items, which means that the entire procurement process has to be restarted, which results in time delays, which further results in out of stocks of critical PPE items. Knowledgeable health SEM practitioners. As I alluded to, one of our challenges was that health officials were not involved in the initial process. It's imperative that health officials that are familiar with the specifications, they are familiar with suppliers. Many of them have had interaction, built supplier relationships with various suppliers, and this would have greatly helped going forward in instances of another pandemic. Enhanced supplier relationships, that is critical. As I said, all organizations, health organizations, were competing for the same item, and as a result of your enhanced supplier relationships with suppliers will be able to understand what are your particular needs, what are your particular quantities that you required, and they will be able to be part of the process and not just receive an order without being part of the process up front. Adapt a centralized warehousing model. One of the lessons that we've learned is that due to capacity constraints within our health institutions, we do within the Gauteng province and in many provinces within South Africa, we do have a warehouse for medical items. That is your drugs, your prescription type of items are housed in a warehouse, and one of the models that we've learned going forward is that we will have to have a centralized warehouse where we could stock all of our items, and not necessarily only the medical related items. Adopt a delivery model for distribution. Have I alluded to the fact is that the health department is not structured to go and collect stock. We rely on suppliers delivering to us. So therefore, when we set up a centralized warehouse, one of the models that will have to be adopted is a delivery model, so that the hospital places an order on the centralized warehouse, and the centralized warehouse will deliver directly through to the health institution. This would save time, and it will also reduce the risks. accredited bodies to be utilized for the checking of the items is that there are a number of bodies in South Africa. There is the SABS, there's SANAS, and there's SAPRA, which are accredited bodies that must be utilized for the quality checking of medical items. And as I said earlier, prior to establishing the term of contracts, all of these products should be sent for quality checking prior to the award. But as we're all aware, is that the item that is submitted for sampling and the item that is delivered is in many cases not the same item. So that's imperative that the health institutions established quality managers at the time of receipting to ensure that the product that was awarded is the product that we actually received. We need to compile a standardized list of PPE items, and it's not only a standardized list, but we also need to ensure that whoever is appointed for that particular usage of that item is the appropriate person, so that we don't, because again, I'll go to the example of the mask. Masks go at various prices, and at this stage, everybody wants to use the expensive mask. So to save cost, we need to determine who would be using what particular item of protection. The NATICAL tool is that currently at the moment we don't have this. Institutions are relying on past issues to determine what their needs is. We do work on a SAP system for procurement, but as far as our inventory management, we operate on a manual system. So there are a number of issues that come into play when you work on a manual system as far as forecasting is concerned. And the last point is closer working relationships between health practitioners and SEN practitioners. That was also alluded to by one of the previous speakers, is that in order to achieve our objective, there needs to be closer working relationships between SEM as well as the various health protectors. I thank you very much for your time and for your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. That was a very interesting presentation. And certainly we have learned a lot from today, from other presenters as well, including yourself. From now, I can look in the question and answer board, and I cannot see any questions thus far. Are there any questions from the attendees? The only one that I can see is it's a comment. Actually, it's a positive one. It says, wonderful presentation, Prof. Basheka, and all the other speakers as well. There is no question. The presentations were very interesting. So that was very good. Thanks to the presenters. You've done an exceptional job. Also, another one is a comment that's saying very good and interesting presentation. So far, everybody loved the presentations that have been given thus far. And are there any other questions? The speakers, I think they are all back. Am I correct, producers?
Yes, Program Director.
Okay, I've just gotten a confirmation from Betul, our producer, that all the speakers are back. Can I just ask them to please join with their cameras on so that we can see who's there, and then we can start maybe taking questions from the attendees. Thank you, Dave. The co-presenter, Prof. Meyer, is also here. Keynote speaker, I can see you. Okay, it looks like we have our first question, which come from one of the attendees, and Tombizota, who is asking, my question is, where do we start to industrialize? I think this one is directed to Prof. Boateng. Is Prof. Boateng back? I cannot see you, Prof. Oh, yes, just got a follow-up that's requesting Prof. Boateng to answer this question. Is Prof. Boateng still around? Prof. Boateng?
I have a view to Mendlamini on the matter.
Oh, thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Sinodi, Deputy, sorry. Well, there is a way. It's prophecy. You're getting there. Why not? Okay. I think since we're waiting for Prof. Boateng, we can give the Honorable Speaker of the Parliament to give us his views on the question on industrialization. Where do we start in Africa, in South Africa and Africa as a whole?
Well, in the health environment, for example, let me start here. The extent and the degree to which indigenous knowledge systems are harnessed effectively in the health environment is a critical area of responsibility. We can't continue the colonial ravishing of indigenous knowledge systems. I was speaking to a 91-year-old lady who has been doing some wonderful basic work teaching young ones to understand the plants around their neighborhoods, their medicinal value, and how independently they can keep themselves healed basic problems of health that are often confronted by young people using the indigenous vegetation, those that have been identified as medicinal and have proven effects on their health. Now, when we conceive of, for example, our general primary health care system, where do the things that are used, medications that are used, come from? And this is why one of the biggest demands for a time being now has been the decision to create in South Africa a pharmaceutical company to produce our own medicines and not depend on exporting the stuff from elsewhere. Of course, there are things that maybe for whatever reason we would be bound to have to import. We don't have them and so on. But there are interesting possibilities of inter-institutional collaboration, researchers from various institutions coming together to suggest this is what we are having. This is a creative application of this, and we ought to do it. It's an important part, for example, especially in the health sector, that we do that. And so there are certain things we spoke about. I referred to the motor companies recognizing that their own productive capacity for producing cars and so on is quite adaptable for the production of ventilators. That's industrialization. That's expansion to do other things ourselves here and deploy them wherever it is necessary to do so and so on. South Africa has a number of areas in which it is very creative in producing what we require in our neighborhoods. I come from the Free State. I know that, for example, in the Botterville area, the Nala municipality, they are well known for manufacturing agricultural equipment. And that's industrialization. That's the kind of thing that we are known for in that sector, at least as one of those things and so on. There are other areas of a similar nature in a variety of sectors that, in fact, government has in the past produced what it called industrial policy action plans. But unfortunately, we haven't quite followed it sufficiently. And one of the components in the water sector, for example, is they've now developed technologies for use in mines to reduce energy usage and including water usage, so that they can, because of being big energy guzzlers, they must reduce their dependence on water and energy in a significant manner. Now, this is stuff that's been done that needs to be done at scale, and so that those who stubbornly want to stay with the old systems, even if they are wasteful and ecologically disastrous, are persuaded to come back to using the application of new technologies and so on. So these are all opportunities for replicating creative inventions that can be manufactured at scale for impact in being deployed across a number of areas. Of course, let me give you one example and shut up. That shows in the current, let's call it an almost indecent, in certain instances, hurry to find a vaccine. There are others who are already seeking to develop treaties and agreements that if you sign up there, if countries sign up there, they will not then on their own produce their own, but will buy from them. So that they want to restrict the manufacturing in their own environments, so that we only serve as customers and consumers of their production, when we have capacity ourselves to utilize to do the same kind of thing. Fortunately, inside the World Health Organization, there's agreement, broadly speaking, that wherever the vaccine gets found, must be utilized across the entirety of the world to save communities and so on, instead of pushing for, insisting on us buying from others, when manufacturing industrialization is an important element of our reconstruction and development of our countries. So that's the brief comment I wanted to make. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I think Mrs. Matsuma is answered. The next question comes from Simon. What would have been the percentage cost related to storage and delivery need from suppliers? And Simon didn't indicate who has to answer this one. I think any of the speakers can answer if possible. Dave, you want to come in?
As far as the storage is concerned, I think we need to limit the percentage of what is actually stored and go on to more of a just-in-time approach, so that we reduce our storage cost, we reduce all the risk, and we put the risk back to the supplier, so that we place the orders bulk orders with suppliers, and then the quantities can then be dispatched as and when, you know, the items are required. As far as percentages is required, I'm not exactly sure of quoting a percentage, but I would say that the bulk of the order percentage should be stored at the supplier. We talk about supplier inventory managed, supplier managed inventory, and I think that's the approach that we should go to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for the answer. I hope Simon is answered. The next question is from Sandile Kabela. I think you wanted to ask, is the environment in our lovely Africa conducive for the digitalization of the supply chain, particularly in the public sector? I think this one, Honorable Speaker, you can help us with this one.
The answer is yes. For digitization, it's already happening. Well, what I mean is that there are certain elements of digital coverage that are in certain sectors as we speak. The challenge, as I said earlier on, is to ensure that we have sufficient coverage that is stable, that covers both urban and rural areas. But also we need a huge amount of capacity building. You know, somebody once said to me, hey, you see, Deputy Speaker, we must train you guys so that you don't treat a computer like a typewriter. There's a lot of things you can do on this computer. It's not just a typewriter. And so capacity building, in addition to laying out the infrastructure, is a critical one, so that there are ways in which we can digitize the process. There is no reason why we shouldn't go that route, especially because of the potential. It's only potential. Slightly more effective methods of preventing fraudulent transactions if we manage the security of digitization appropriately, because thieves operate even on cyberspace. So the part of the pillars of our digitization strategy is not only interoperability of systems, but also their convenience as well as their security. Those are some of the 3 of the 4 pillars of the digitization strategy. But soon, I think the 4th Industrial Revolution Commission, I think, presented its report to Cabinet, and I'm not certain whether Cabinet has released that report yet. And if it has, you might want to just go and check it on gov.za to see if that report is there. It might be there already. That's talk about the overall strategy that has been designed for the so-called 4th Industrial Revolution. And digitization is an element of that strategy. And you might get the most latest information there about where the process is. I'm aware that we ourselves, I'm incidentally responsible for working towards e-Parliament and other 4th Industrial Revolution projects for Parliament. And we are working together with the other the 9 legislatures to move so that we have an effective system, an appropriate automation, an appropriate interaction with the rest of the relations we have with others. We have sorted out one part of that, which is the the setting up a bargaining council for the labor related issues. We now have that. It didn't exist in the legislative sector. So there are certain things that we would agree in common for it to be improved. We are moving through some of these steps towards elements of what the questioner is asking, that we are building that environment. And we hope soon to point out and report on some interesting examples of progress we are making, including hopefully in this area. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And the next one, I think it's just a comment, which is commending Prof. Ambe on this initiative. Well done, Prof. And I think the sentiments are felt by all of us. Thank you very much, Prof. Ambe, for this initiative. I think we all needed it and we have learned a lot. Thank you. I feel like, you know, this is when we miss human interaction, because we would be giving him a very big applause on this one. Thank you very much, Prof. And the next one is, you want to say something, Prof? Please unmute yourself.
The Deputy Speaker have alluded a lot, I mean, with the issue of industrialization. I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to comment on the issue of the digitalization, that in fact the COVID-19 became by default an impetus to foster digitalization. We have tried it, we've seen it. I mean, apart from the commission, which the Deputy Speaker is talking about, there are a lot of reports out there in the country that have been conducted on the fourth industrial revolution. So we do not have a choice. It is what we call now the new normal, which we need to find a way. I mean, a lot of stakeholders indicated that we could not move digitalization because of rural areas where they were facing challenges. I mean, even from UNISA, we had a strategy of going full online learning. And for some time now, I think the debate have always been around the issue of that there are areas where students may not have access to technology. And given COVID that is coming now, it actually propelled to say, no, we do not have a choice. We are already in the era of the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you very much.
In fact, if I may just add to say that COVID, if nothing else, it accelerated our collective migration to cyberspace. Even those who were skeptical and wouldn't want to do it were forced, because they could no longer go to the office now and have face-to-face meetings. So they were forced onto the cyberspace. So COVID, bad as it is, has been good for helping us migrate onto cyberspace and operate. In fact, there are questions about why should I or someone else continue to go to an office. Some of the people have already decided, of course, this is big business and those who can afford this kind of things, that it's Microsoft have decided you will not come to work. It's a permanent arrangement. You work from home now. So no, the technology is in the African continent. We have a big challenge because of the backlogs and we hope those who have benefited from Africa before will compensate us by helping deal with these backlogs of linking and connecting people in both urban and rural areas, so that they can, nobody must not be able to conduct whatever they want to conduct using digital systems and so on. So we must remove the obstacles that often, when such development happen, people kick the ladder away so that they remain alone up there. So we are on our way there. We will construct our own ladder, even if they kick it away.
Thank you very much for clarifying all those points. I think now time is not on our side. When we were asking for questions, there were no questions, and suddenly there's quite a lot of questions. I think they can be answered later on, or they can be send us the email as well. They will be sent to the speakers, and you can get more clarity on those points. I think we have to close now. I am going to ask Prof. Webb. Prof. Webb is currently acting school director for Department of Public Administration and Management. He's also the my current leader in also the chair of the department, but he is also now substantive in this position as a school director. So he has taught in many universities, including Rao, the former Vista, and UJ, and currently he is also with us at the University of South Africa. And Prof. Webb will close for us in 10 minutes. Please close for us. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, Ms. Lamini, Program Director of the second session. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Prof.
Okay. Colleagues, I have been requested to say a few words in respect of closing your session, this session 2 and session 1, and indeed this entire program today, and perhaps say a few words about the way forward. And I, from the outset, do not want to make as if I'm a specialist in this area, but I'm very proud to be presiding over the school at this point, and proud to see how the AISCR has been able in a very short space of time play a key role in the research and practice of supply chain in the country and on the continent. It's extremely impressive. Ms. Lamini, you mentioned earlier that the college board supported the creation establishment of the AISCR in May 2020, and we are in October. Within 5 months you've made magnificent progress, and you've also referred to developing research activities, M&D, supervision, roundtables. The list is long and it's very impressive. But I just want to reflect on a bit on today. I spent all the time on the background and I've listened carefully to all the presenters, and I could see when I witnessed the discussions from a distance, I could see a very good balance between academics and practitioners in this round table, sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, and setting the agenda. I could also pick up two main themes in today's discussion. The one theme, the first theme that I could pick up, identify, is the reflection of current and past practices, given COVID, given the impact of COVID on supply chain practices. And there I think of what Mr. Selby reported right at the end. Professor Basheka also reflected on challenges that they are experiencing and have experienced in Uganda, and also Ms. Lestati from SALGA, reflecting on the challenges that COVID-19 has posed on the practice and the science of supply chain. Going forward, the second main theme that I could pick up, that I could identify, is more forward-looking. What should the future hold? What should our agenda be? Now, there I want to emphasize or identify Honourable Tenoli, who spoke about a number of challenges going forward. The first is the one of digitization, or the lack of access in rural areas to ICT, also to poverty, the problems and the challenges of poverty and marginalization that have over the past couple of months increased. And it's clear from Honourable Tenoli's presentation this morning that we must look forward to investigate the role of supply chain in eradicating poverty and decreasing marginalization in our society. Honourable Skosana also was forward-looking in talking about the importance of consequence management. Honourable Skosana, it was clear that that in your presentation this morning, you referred to measures of punity, recovering of costs. You also referred to regular briefings of APAC. These are tremendous ideas and thoughts and trends, and in fact, if I can call them setting the agenda, you've set the agenda. My apology, you've set the agenda for us as scholars and practitioners to know what is the way forward. So from what I could see, colleagues, my closing remarks is that this virtual seminar, this virtual summit, was able to produce excellent ideas on the way forward. And both as academics, as scholars, as practitioners, we can look forward to the agenda. I also want to refer to Ms. Lestazzi, who referred to the human element, the challenge of the human element in supply chain practices. Mr. Karani from Kenya gave us excellent pointers in terms of values such as resilience. Supply chain practices should be resilient. We should adjust faster to demand. We should be flexible and we should be agile. And we should be less behind our desks. Excellent ideas. Thank you very much, Mr. Karani. Professor Boateng from Ghana referred to the key tenets of effective leadership, transparency, the importance of rule of law, and a simple framework of supply chain. Also that the importance of being driven by customer need. Also the presentation by Mr. Selby referred exactly to the chasm that existed during the immediate past COVID-19 pandemic, perhaps not past, but where we are in at the moment, in the lack of synergy between the health supply chain management practitioners, between the health practitioners themselves in doing supply chain. Colleagues, Professor Basheka from Uganda referred to the importance of ICT innovations, and that we should engage in multi-sectoral engagements. And also he pointed out the importance of policy decision making and the impact that that has on supply chain. Colleagues, from what I can gather, there are multiple agenda points which this forum, as well as the academic enterprise, can pursue in the next 5 to 10 years. Colleagues, with those remarks, I want to thank in particular the president of AISCR, Professor Ambe, for hosting an excellent virtual summit. I wish him all the best with your endeavors going forward. I also want to thank the two program directors, Ms. Lamini, who was managing the second part of the program, as well as Professor Meyer. Thank you very much for your excellent facilitation and directing of the program this morning, colleagues. And then our keynote speaker, Honorable Tenoli, Deputy Speaker, and our other speakers, Honorable Skosana, Mr. Karane. I also want to thank Professor Boateng, Professor Basheka, Mr. Selby, and also Ms. Lestati. Colleagues, thank you very much for your inputs, for your discussions, for your time. I have found it myself extremely engaging, relevant and challenging, the discussions that we have had this morning and this afternoon. So with those words, I hope that you have a good afternoon, a peaceful evening, and thank you very much for your contribution. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you
I
very
just
much.
wanted to say thank you from my side as well. Sorry, Winnie, please continue.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to thank all the speakers and the keynote presenter. We had a wonderful time, and all the attendees. Sorry to those who the questions that were not answered, but there is still a platform for that, and presentations will be sent to all the attendees. Thank you very much, Prof. Ambe. Thank you very much, Prof. Webb. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much, mate. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Prof. May is still around to say goodbye.
Yes, I want to take the opportunity to thank all the participants, all the esteemed guests, and it was again a pleasure to be part of the facilitation team. I also wish to extend my thanks to those in the background who facilitated our whims whilst we were continuing. I think we're taking a lot away from this summit, and nobody can actually gauge the depth of what was given through today until we actually implement this. Prof. Marcus, whom I know very well, still has a lot to do with everything that was inputted into the system right now. So thank you once again to everybody. I appreciate the opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, program directors. Probably just to note that we are preparing a rapporteur report, and there will be something that will be communicated to you. Thank you very much, Ntate Senoni. Thank you very much, Ntate Nkosana. Thank you very much, Ntate Selby and Prof. Webb. Thank you very much, program director. Thank you so much. I think it went very well.
Indeed. And now nobody wants to leave. At this stage, it appears everybody is so happy to remain online, to be there. Thank you.
Networking.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Visual
Thank
network.
you. I am going. I'm going to take my leave now and get into a state of undress. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Bye.